The gunshot echoed through the valley like a crack of lightning, sending a flock of startled crows into the dusky Montana sky. Kathleen Cooper clutched her father's rifle tighter, her knuckles white against the worn wooden stock as she stared down at the rattlesnake she had just dispatched. 3 years a widow, and still every loud noise reminded her of that terrible day when the stagecoach had been attacked, taking her husband James and leaving her alone with 2 small children on a homestead, too vast for one woman's hands. The year was 1878, and the promise of the frontier had turned bitter in Kathleen's mouth. She lowered the rifle, her amber eyes scanning the horizon, where her modest ranch house stood, silhouetted against the setting sun. The children would be waiting, hungry and hopeful that today might be different, that today their mother might smile again. "Good shot, madam," came a deep voice from behind her. Kathleen whirled, rifle halfway to her shoulder, before she registered the man sitting atop a chestnut gelding. His face was weathered like the mountains behind him, his eyes the clear blue of a high country lake. A dusty black hat sat low on his brow, and his denim and leather spoke of long days in the saddle. "State your business," she demanded, not lowering her weapon. "This is private property." The stranger raised his hands slowly. "Name's Caleb Norris, madam. Just passing through when I heard the shot. Thought someone might be in trouble." Kathleen didn't move. "We handle our own troubles here, Mr. Norris." "So I see." His eyes flickered to the dead snake, then back to her face. Something like respect crossed his features. "You've got a good eye." "And 2 children waiting for supper," she replied, finally lowering the rifle but keeping it ready. "Good day to you." She turned to go, but his voice stopped her. "Those your cattle scattered on the south ridge?" Kathleen froze. "What about them?" "Saw some men watching them earlier. Didn't look like ranch hands to me." Her heart sank. Cattle rustlers had been working their way through the valley for months, picking off the herds of those too weak to defend them. Without James, without help, she knew her small herd was an easy target. "I appreciate the warning," she said stiffly. "Madam, I don't mean to overstep, but—" "Then don't," she cut him off. "Good evening, Mr. Norris." Kathleen marched back toward her homestead, feeling his eyes on her back the entire way. Only when she reached the wooden gate did she hear the sound of hoofbeats retreating into the distance. Inside, 8-year-old Thomas and 6-year-old Sarah sat at the rough-hewn table, attempting to finish their lessons by lamplight. Their faces brightened at her entrance. "Did you get something for supper, Mama?" Sarah asked, her small face hopeful. Kathleen forced a smile. "Not today, sweetheart, but we have beans and the last of yesterday's bread." Thomas, so like his father with those serious brown eyes, watched her carefully. "I heard a shot." "Just a snake," she assured him, hanging the rifle on its pegs by the door. "Nothing to worry about." That night, after the children were asleep, Kathleen sat by the window, staring out at her land bathed in moonlight. The cattle represented everything: the mortgage payments to the bank, food on the table, clothes for growing children. If rustlers took them, she'd have nothing left to sell come autumn. A soft nickering drew her attention. A horse in the yard, not hers. Kathleen reached for the rifle again, easing toward the door. Outside, tied to her fence post, stood the chestnut gelding from earlier. Attached to the saddle was a burlap sack. She approached cautiously, rifle ready. Inside the sack, she found a dressed rabbit and a folded piece of paper. By the light of the moon, she read the simple message. "For the young'uns. I'll watch your cattle tonight." Kathleen's throat tightened. Pride warred with desperation as she looked out toward the south ridge. Somewhere in the darkness, a stranger was guarding what remained of her life. She took the rabbit inside, her hands trembling slightly. Tomorrow, she decided, she would find this Caleb Norris and thank him properly before sending him on his way. But morning brought chaos instead of clarity. Kathleen awoke to the sound of hoofbeats and men's shouts. She threw a shawl around her shoulders and rushed outside to find a small herd of cattle being driven into her corral more than had been there the day before, and riding behind them was Caleb Norris, his shirt torn and a streak of dried blood on his cheekbone. "Mr. Norris," she called, striding toward him. "What is the meaning of this?" He dismounted with fluid grace despite his apparent injuries. "Found some fellows helping themselves to your cattle, madam. Persuaded them to return what they'd taken. Plus a few extra as compensation for your trouble." "You did what?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. got your cattle back," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to risk his life for a woman he didn't know. "You could have been killed." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Could have been, but wasn't. Thomas and Sarah burst from the house then, exclaiming over the cattle and the tall stranger who towered over their mother. Kathleen watched as Caleb answered their rapid-fire questions with patience, kneeling down to their level despite what must have been considerable pain from his injuries. "Are you staying for breakfast, mister?" Thomas asked, looking up at Caleb with undisguised admiration. Before Kathleen could intervene, Caleb glanced at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "That's up to your ma." 3 pairs of eyes turned to her, and Kathleen felt herself yielding. "I suppose the least I can do is feed you before you move on, Mr. Norris." And so began a temporary arrangement that defied Kathleen's expectations. Caleb stayed for breakfast, then helped mend the broken corral fence. By midday, he'd fixed a leaking roof that had plagued her for months. When evening came, she couldn't bring herself to send him away, not with rustlers still in the area, and so many chores requiring a man's strength. "One more day," she told him over supper, after the children had gone to bed, "then you should be on your way." Caleb nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "Yes, madam." But one day stretched into 2, then a week, then a month. June blossomed into July, and Caleb Norris became a fixture at the Cooper homestead. He slept in the barn, rose before dawn to tend the cattle, taught Thomas to track and fish, and even showed Sarah how to whistle through a blade of grass. The children flourished under his quiet attention, and Kathleen found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, wondering about the man who'd appeared from nowhere to rescue them all. It was on a sweltering August afternoon that Kathleen finally asked the question that had been burning inside her. They were mending shirts in the shade of the porch, the children playing by the creek within sight but out of earshot. "Why did you stay, Mr. Norris?" Caleb's hand stilled on the leather he was working. "You needed help. There are plenty of people who need help in this territory." "Why us?" He was silent for so long that Kathleen thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low and rough with emotion. "When I came across this place, I saw something worth saving." "A widow and 2 half-starved children?" she asked with a bitter edge. "A family," he corrected gently, "holding on despite everything. It reminded me of what I once had." Kathleen's hands stilled. "You had a family? Wife and daughter?" His eyes remained on his work. "Yellow fever took them 5 years ago in Texas." "I'm sorry," she whispered, understanding now the shadows that sometimes crossed his face when he watched her with the children. "Been drifting ever since," he continued, "never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. Until—" He stopped abruptly, as if he'd said too much. "Until what?" His eyes finally met hers, and the naked longing she saw there stole her breath. "Until I heard that shot and found you standing over that snake like some avenging angel." Heat rose to Kathleen's cheeks, and she looked away. "I'm no angel, Mr. Norris, just a woman trying to survive." "Caleb," he said softly. "After all this time, I think you might call me Caleb." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Kathleen stood suddenly, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "I should check on the children." That night, she lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, thinking of a man sleeping in her barn who had lost as much as she had, yet had found the strength to keep living, to keep giving. It frightened her, this growing dependence on his presence, this warmth that spread through her chest when he smiled at her across the supper table. James had been dead 3 years, but sometimes grief felt as fresh as yesterday. Was there room in her heart for another? Did she even deserve such a second chance? Her troubled thoughts were interrupted by a sound from outside hoofbeats, moving fast. Kathleen slipped from bed and grabbed her rifle, a sense of foreboding washing over her. Through the window, she saw riders approaching in the moonlight, 4 of them, moving with purpose toward her homestead. Heart pounding, she pulled on her boots and shawl before waking the children. "Thomas, Sarah, listen carefully. I need you to hide in the root cellar and not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Can you do that for me?" Their sleepy faces grew serious as they nodded. Sensing the urgency in her voice, Kathleen ushered them through the kitchen and down into the small earthen cellar beneath the house, pressing a quick kiss to each frightened brow before closing the trapdoor. She emerged from the house just as Caleb appeared from the barn, rifle in hand. "Rustlers?" she asked, her voice steady despite her fear. "Not likely," he replied grimly. "That's Wade Holcomb and his boys. They're not here for cattle." Kathleen's blood ran cold. The Holcomb gang had a notorious reputation, bank robbers and killers who left destruction in their wake. "What do they want?" Caleb's face hardened. "Me." Before she could question him further, the riders pulled up in the yard, silhouetted against the night sky. The leader, a broad-shouldered man with a bushy beard, called out, "Norris, we know you're here. Come on out and face what's coming to you." Caleb moved to step forward, but Kathleen grabbed his arm. "What is this about?" His eyes, when they met hers, were filled with regret. "There's a lot I haven't told you, Kathleen. Things I'm not proud of." "Tell me now," she demanded, even as the riders began to spread out around the house. "I rode with them once, years ago," he confessed quickly. "After I lost my family, I lost myself too. Did things I can't undo, but I left that life behind, testified against Wade when the law finally caught up to him. And now he's free," she concluded, understanding dawning. "And now he's free," Caleb confirmed. "He's been hunting me ever since he broke out of Yuma Territorial Prison." The leader's voice boomed across the yard again. "Send out the woman and kids, Norris. This is between you and me." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Get back inside, Kathleen. Lock the door and stay low." "I will not," she replied fiercely. "This is my home. These men will kill you without blinking an eye." "Then we'd better not give them the chance." Kathleen checked her rifle. "I'm a better shot than you think." A grudging admiration flickered across Caleb's face. "I never doubted it for a second." Together, they took positions on the porch, using the railing as cover. Caleb called out, "The lady and her children have nothing to do with this, Wade. Let them be, and I'll come peaceful." A harsh laugh answered him. "Too late for that, traitor. You'll all pay for harboring a snake." The first shot cracked through the night, splintering wood near Kathleen's head. She returned fire instinctively, hearing a satisfying yelp as one of the riders clutched his arm. What followed was a chaos of gunfire and shouted threats. Caleb moved with the precision of a man who'd done this before, each shot calculated. Kathleen matched his calm, pushing down her terror for her children hidden below. When a bullet grazed Caleb's shoulder, drawing a line of blood, Kathleen felt fury rise within her. These men had come to her home, threatened her family, and now hurt the man who'd done nothing but help her for months. Something fierce and protective awoke inside her, something she thought had died with James. The firefight seemed to last forever, though it was probably only minutes. When the dust settled, one of Holcomb's men lay still in the dirt, another was wounded, and the remaining two, including Wade himself, had retreated to the edge of the property. "This isn't over, Norris," Wade shouted. "We'll be back with more men." Then they were gone, galloping away into the darkness. Kathleen immediately ran to check the root cellar, finding her children scared but unharmed. She held them tight, whispering reassurances as she led them back to the house. Caleb stood in the yard, staring after the retreating figures, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. When he turned to Kathleen, there was resignation in his eyes. "I have to leave," he said simply. "They'll be back, and next time they might bring more men." "Where will you go?" she asked, holding her children closer. "Doesn't matter. Somewhere they won't find me." He looked at the house, at the life he'd helped rebuild. "I'm sorry, Kathleen. I never meant to bring this danger to your door." Thomas broke from his mother's embrace, running to Caleb and throwing his arms around the man's waist. "Don't go! We need you here." Caleb knelt, gently disentangling the boy's arms. "Your ma is strong, Thomas. She can take care of you and your sister just fine." "But she smiles when you're here," Sarah said softly, joining her brother. She didn't smile before. Kathleen felt tears prick her eyes as Caleb looked up at her over the children's heads, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I'll leave at first light," he said, voice rough with emotion. "It's the only way to keep you safe." That night, as the children finally slept, exhausted by fear and excitement, Kathleen found Caleb in the barn, packing his few possessions. "You don't have to go," she said from the doorway. He didn't look up. You know I do. We could fight them together, or report them to the marshal in town. Wade has friends everywhere. He won't stop until I'm dead. Caleb finally turned to her. I won't risk you and the children getting caught in the crossfire. So you'll just leave after everything? Kathleen stepped closer. The cattle are thriving. The crops are growing. For the first time since James died, I feel like we might actually survive out here. Because of you, Caleb. They need more than me, he said softly. They need a man without a price on his head. A man worthy of them. Of you. Something broke open inside Kathleen, then a dam holding back emotions she'd refused to acknowledge. Then let me be the more, she whispered, moving closer still. Confusion crossed his face. What? If they need more than you, then let me be that more, she said, voice stronger now. Let me be the reason you stay and fight instead of run. Let me stand beside you against whatever comes. His hands, calloused and strong, clenched at his sides. You don't know what you're saying. What I've done? I know the man who's been here these past months, she interrupted. The man who teaches my son to be honorable and my daughter to be brave. The man who works from sunrise to sunset without complaint. Whatever you did before, I see who you are now. Caleb shook his head, though Kathleen could see his resolve weakening. I can't ask you to put yourself in danger for me. You're not asking, I'm offering. She took a deep breath. James has been gone 3 years. I never thought I'd feel anything again for anyone. But then you came, and something inside me started to heal. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Caleb stepped forward, raising a tentative hand to her cheek. Kathleen, stay, she whispered. Stay, and we'll face them together. Or go, if you must, but take us with you. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. You would leave your home? For me? Home isn't a place, she said, covering his hand with hers. It's the people you love. The word love slipped out before she could catch it, and she saw it land like a physical thing between them. Caleb's eyes darkened, and for one breathless moment, Kathleen thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were something infinitely precious. I'll stay, he murmured against her hair, but we'll need help. Wade won't stop coming. In the gray light of dawn, they formed a plan. Kathleen would take the children to town, to the safety of the local hotel, while Caleb rode to find Marshal Jenkins. Rustlers were one thing. Escaped convicts seeking vengeance were another matter entirely. Even with Caleb's past, the law would have to intervene. As Kathleen hitched the wagon and prepared the children, Caleb saddled his horse, checking and rechecking his weapons. Be careful, she told him as they prepared to part ways. Come back to us. Something like wonder crossed his face at her words. I will. I promise. They traveled separate roads, but toward the same future, one Kathleen had never imagined possible when she'd stood over that dead rattlesnake just months before. The hotel in Cottonwood Creek was a modest 2-story building with clean rooms and a sympathetic proprietor. Mrs. Landry, a widow herself, took one look at Kathleen's determined face and frightened children and understood that something serious was afoot. Take the corner room upstairs, she said, pressing the key into Kathleen's hand. It has a good view of the street, and the back window opens to the roof of the kitchen if you need to. Well, if you need another way out. Kathleen thanked her, grateful for the woman's perception. The children, sensing adventure rather than danger, settled into exploring their temporary quarters, while Kathleen kept watch by the window, praying that Caleb would return soon, and preferably with the law behind him. But as afternoon stretched into evening, with no sign of either Caleb or the marshal, anxiety began to gnaw at her. What if Wade Holcomb had intercepted him on the road? What if the marshal had arrested Caleb instead of helping him? What if, Mama, someone's coming? Thomas called from where he'd taken up his own vigil at the other window. Kathleen rushed to his side, heart in her throat. But it wasn't Caleb riding down the main street, it was Wade Holcomb and at least 6 men, their expressions grim and purposeful. They pulled up outside the saloon across the street, dismounting with the confidence of men who feared no law. Get away from the window, Kathleen instructed, pulling Thomas back. Both of you stay low and quiet. She retrieved her rifle from where it leaned against the wall, checking it with hands that refused to tremble. If Holcomb and his men had come to town, it meant they knew where she and the children were, which meant they'd either followed them or no. She wouldn't allow herself to think that Caleb had been caught, or worse. He was too clever, too resourceful for that. A knock at the door made all three of them freeze. Kathleen motioned for the children to hide in the small closet before approaching the door, rifle ready. "Who is it?" she called softly. "Mrs. Landry, dear, you have visitors downstairs." Something in the woman's tone sent warning bells ringing in Kathleen's head. "What kind of visitors?" A pause. Then, "Men asking after you and Mr. Norris. I told them I didn't know who they meant, but I don't think they believe me." Kathleen's mind raced. "Are you alone?" For the moment, they're watching the stairs. "Is there another way down? Besides the main staircase?" "Service stairs at the back, by the kitchen," Mrs. Landry whispered through the door. "But they've got men watching the back door, too. You're trapped, unless what? The telegraph office has a connecting door to our kitchen. If you can get to the roof I mentioned, there's a ladder that the repairmen use. It'll take you right down to the back of the telegraph office." Hope surged in Kathleen's chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Landry." "Hurry, dear. I don't think we have much time." The sound of heavy boots on the stairs confirmed the proprietor's assessment. Kathleen gathered the children, explaining quickly what they needed to do. "Like a game?" Sarah asked, eyes wide. "Yes, sweetheart. A very quiet game where we have to be very brave." Thomas, already showing the makings of the man he would become, nodded solemnly. "I'll help Sarah, Mama. You just tell us what to do." The back window opened with a protesting creak that seemed deafening in the quiet room. Outside, the slanted roof of the kitchen extension provided a precarious but navigable path to the ladder Mrs. Landry had mentioned. Kathleen helped the children through first, steadying them on the rough shingles before following with her rifle and a small bag of essentials. Below, she could hear men's voices growing louder, more insistent. Mrs. Landry's replies became harder to make out as Kathleen guided her children across the roof, staying low to avoid being seen from the street. The ladder, when they reached it, was old but sturdy. Kathleen went first, helping Thomas and Sarah down after her. True to Mrs. Landry's word, a small door led from the narrow alley directly into the back room of the telegraph office. Inside, a startled young operator looked up from his key, mouth falling open at the sight of a woman with 2 children and a rifle climbing through his window. "Please," Kathleen said before he could raise an alarm. "We need help. There are men after us, dangerous men." Whether it was the desperation in her voice or the undeniable fear in the children's faces, the telegrapher, barely more than a boy himself, nodded. "My uncle's the operator here. He stepped out for supper, but he won't be back for an hour at least. You can hide here until then." "Have you sent any messages for the marshal today?" Kathleen asked, hope flaring. "Or received any about men named Holcomb or Norris?" The young man frowned. "Marshal Jenkins rode out this morning after getting a message from Cedar Ridge, something about escaped prisoners. Haven't heard from him since." Cedar Ridge was in the opposite direction from where Caleb had gone, looking for the marshal, which meant, "I need to send a telegram," Kathleen decided. "To Cedar Ridge. Can you do that?" "Yes, madam, but it'll cost—" She pressed a silver dollar into his hand. "Please, it's important." The message she composed was simple. "Holcomb gang in Cottonwood, stop need marshal. Urgently stop. Widow Cooper and children in danger, stop." As the telegrapher's key clicked out her desperate plea, Kathleen gathered her children close, praying that help would come in time. Outside, shouts indicated that Holcomb's men had discovered their absence from the hotel. It wouldn't take them long to start searching other buildings. "Is there a back way out of here?" she asked the telegrapher, who was now looking increasingly nervous. "Yes'm. Through the storeroom and out to the livery stable behind us. My uncle keeps a buggy there." It was their best chance. Kathleen thanked the young man, pressing her last few coins into his hand. "If anyone asks, I ain't seen nobody," he finished for her with a determined nod. The storeroom was dark and cluttered with crates and equipment, but a small door at the back opened onto a narrow passageway leading to the livery as promised. Kathleen urged the children forward, her senses alert for any sign of pursuit. The livery stable was mercifully empty save for the horses in their stalls. The buggy sat ready in a corner, as if waiting for them. As Kathleen helped the children climb in, a sound from the entrance made her spin around, rifle raised. "Easy," came a familiar voice. "It's just me." Caleb emerged from the shadows, his face streaked with dirt and what looked like blood, but blessedly alive. Relief flooded through Kathleen with such force that her knees nearly buckled. "Caleb!" The children's voices rang out in unison as they scrambled back down from the buggy and rushed to him. He knelt to embrace them briefly before rising to meet Kathleen's gaze. "Marshall Jenkins is dead," he said quietly. "Ambushed on the trail to Cedar Ridge. I found his body on my way back." Horror washed through her. "Then there's no help coming?" "I wouldn't say that." Caleb's mouth quirked in a grim smile. "Found some other friends along the way. Men who owe me favors or have their own reasons to want Wade Holcomb brought down." As if summoned by his words, 3 more figures appeared at the livery entrance, hard-looking men with the unmistakable bearing of frontiersmen who'd seen their share of trouble. "Kathleen, meet Ethan Doyle, Miguel Fuentes, and Jim Blackburn. Boys, this is Mrs. Cooper and her children." The men tipped their hats respectfully. The oldest of them, a grizzled man with a scar running from eye to jaw, spoke first. "Madam, Caleb here pulled my boy from a river 2 springs ago. Said you needed some help with vermin. Holcomb killed my brother during a bank robbery in Tucson," the youngest added, his eyes hard despite his boyish face. "Been waiting for a chance at him ever since." The third man, clearly of Mexican descent, simply nodded. "I owe this man my life. Where he goes, I go." Hope, fragile but growing, bloomed in Kathleen's chest. "What's the plan?" "Get you and the children somewhere safe first," Caleb said firmly. "Then end this, one way or another." But even as he spoke, shouts from the street indicated that Holcomb's men were spreading their search. They were running out of time. "The ranch," Kathleen decided suddenly. "We go back to the ranch." Caleb looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. "That's the first place they'll look." "Exactly, but they've already been there, searched it. They won't expect us to return." She grabbed his arm. "Caleb, I'm tired of running. This is our home. If we're going to make a stand, let it be there." The other men exchanged glances, something like respect dawning in their eyes. Caleb studied Kathleen's face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "All right, but we do this my way. No risks." They left town under cover of darkness, taking a circuitous route back to the Cooper homestead. The children, exhausted by fear and excitement, fell asleep against Kathleen in the buggy. Caleb rode alongside, his expression alternating between tenderness when he looked at her and the children, and grim determination when he scanned the horizon. The other men spread out, scouting ahead and behind, ensuring they weren't followed. By the time they reached the ranch, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the promise of dawn. The house stood silent and undisturbed, just as they had left it. Inside, evidence of Holcomb's search was everywhere: upended furniture, broken dishes, torn mattresses. Kathleen swallowed her anger as she settled the children in the root cellar once more, promising that this would be the last time they had to hide. Upstairs, the men were already preparing. Windows were reinforced, ammunition distributed, positions assigned. Caleb found Kathleen in what remained of the kitchen, attempting to restore some order to the chaos. "You should be in the cellar with the children," he said softly. She shook her head, continuing to sweep broken crockery. "I told you before, this is my fight too." "Kathleen." He stepped closer, taking the broom gently from her hands. "I can't focus on what needs to be done if I'm worried about you getting hurt. And I can't hide while other people fight my battles." She met his gaze steadily. "You taught Thomas that a person stands up for what matters. You matter, Caleb. This home matters. Our future matters." The word "our" hung between them, full of promise and possibility. Caleb's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch reverent. "When this is over," he began, then stopped, as if afraid to voice what might come next. "When this is over," Kathleen finished for him, "we'll build something new, together." His eyes, so blue and clear, searched hers for any doubt. Finding none, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a gentle promise, a beginning. The moment was interrupted by Jim Blackburn's low whistle from the front room, their signal, riders approaching. Kathleen checked her rifle one last time, before taking up her position by the kitchen window. Across the room, Miguel nodded to her, his own weapon ready. Upstairs, Ethan and Jim would cover the approaches from the second floor, while Caleb waited on the porch, apparently alone, the bait in their trap. Wade Holcomb and his remaining men, 5 of them now approached with the caution of predators sensing a trap. They stopped just beyond rifle range, Wade's voice carrying across the yard. "Norris, I know you're in there. Send out the woman and kids, and maybe I'll let you die quick." Caleb's response was measured, his voice carrying a confidence that belied their precarious position. "It's over, Wade. Marshall knows everything. Men on their way from Cedar Ridge right now." A harsh laugh answered him. "Nice try. Jenkins is feeding the coyotes back on the South Trail." "Didn't say it was Jenkins coming." Caleb shifted, letting sunlight glint off something on his chest, a badge, Kathleen realized with a start. Where had he gotten a badge? The bluff worked. Uncertainty rippled through Holcomb's men, visible even at a distance. One of them leaned in to speak urgently to Wade, who shoved him away angrily. "You think I'm scared of a badge?" Wade called. "That tin star won't stop a bullet, traitor." "No," Caleb agreed calmly, "but the 4 rifles aimed at your chest might give you pause." Tension stretched taut as a bowstring as Wade assessed the situation, clearly trying to determine if Caleb was bluffing. Finally, with a roar of frustration, he made his decision. "Kill them all!" he shouted, spurring his horse forward. What followed was chaos and gunfire. Kathleen found herself acting on instinct, firing when she had a clear shot, ducking when bullets splintered the window frame beside her. Miguel moved with practiced efficiency, his shots finding their marks with deadly accuracy. Outside, Caleb had taken cover behind a water trough, exchanging fire with Wade and his closest ally. From upstairs came the steady report of Jim and Ethan's rifles, picking off the outlaws one by one. It happened so quickly. One moment Wade was shouting orders. The next he was making a desperate dash for Caleb's position, gun blazing. Kathleen saw Caleb rise to meet the threat, saw his gun track Wade's movement. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Wade stumbled, a look of surprise crossing his face as he fell. But Caleb also staggered, clutching his side. "No!" Kathleen's cry tore from her throat as she abandoned her post, racing toward the porch. By the time she reached him, the gunfire had ceased. Wade Holcomb lay motionless in the dirt. His remaining men had either fallen or fled. Caleb was sitting with his back against the porch steps, his hand pressed to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "Told you to stay inside," he grumbled as she knelt beside him. "And I told you I don't take orders well," she replied, gently moving his hand to examine the wound. The bullet had caught him in the side, painful but not immediately life-threatening, if they could stop the bleeding. "Is it over?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Kathleen looked around at the silent yard, at Miguel checking the fallen outlaws, at Jim and Ethan emerging cautiously from the house. "Yes," she said softly. "It's over." Relief flooded Caleb's face, followed quickly by something else, a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I meant what I said, Kathleen. When this is over." She pressed a finger to his lips, silencing him. "First, we get you patched up. Then we talk about the future." The following days passed in a blur of activity. The marshal from Cedar Ridge finally arrived, a day late but in time to help clean up the aftermath. Wade Holcomb and 2 of his men were buried in unmarked graves on the far edge of Kathleen's property. The survivors were shackled and taken to face justice for their crimes. Caleb's wound, while serious, began to heal under Kathleen's careful attention. His friends stayed on to help with repairs to the house and ranch, their initial wariness around Kathleen and the children giving way to a comfortable camaraderie. It was on a crisp September evening, with the first hints of autumn coloring the distant mountains, that Kathleen found Caleb sitting alone on the porch. His side was still bandaged, but he moved more easily now, the pain receding a little more each day. She sat beside him, a companionable silence settling between them as they watched the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Your friends are leaving tomorrow," she said finally. Caleb nodded. "Jim's got family waiting in Colorado. Ethan's heading to California to try his luck in the gold fields. Miguel's staying on at the Sanderson place. They offered him work for the winter." "And you?" Kathleen asked, her heart beating a little faster. What are your plans, Caleb Norris? He turned to face her, his expression serious. That depends on you, Kathleen Cooper. On me? I meant what I said that night. I'm not the man I was when I rode with Holcomb, but I'm not sure I'm the man you and the children deserve either. Kathleen considered his words carefully before responding. When James died, I thought my life was over. I existed only for Thomas and Sarah. Then you came, and suddenly I remembered what it was to hope, to look forward instead of back. She took his hand, tracing the calluses and scars that spoke of a life hard-lived. You once said they need more than you, but you were wrong, Caleb. You are exactly what we need, what I need. A man who protects what he cares about, who teaches by example, who can acknowledge his past but isn't defined by it. Something like wonder dawned in his eyes. Are you saying? I'm saying stay, she said simply. Not in the barn, not as a hired hand. Stay as more. More, he echoed, the word carrying all the weight of their shared history and future possibilities. I love you, Caleb Norris, Kathleen whispered, the admission both terrifying and freeing. I think I have since you left that rabbit for my hungry children. His hand trembled slightly in hers. I've loved you since I saw you standing over that dead snake, looking fierce enough to take on the whole world. They both laughed, the tension breaking like a summer storm. When Caleb leaned in to kiss her, it felt like coming home after a long journey, familiar and new all at once. The sound of the door opening made them break apart. Thomas and Sarah stood watching them, with identical expressions of curiosity and hope. Are you going to be our new pa? Thomas asked bluntly. Caleb looked to Kathleen, who nodded almost imperceptibly. If that's something you might want, he answered carefully. And if your ma agrees to marry me. Well, Sarah demanded impatiently when Kathleen remained silent, overcome with emotion. Are you going to marry him, Mama? Kathleen laughed through the tears that had begun to fall. Yes, she said, squeezing Caleb's hand. Yes, I'm going to marry him. The children's whoops of delight echoed across the yard as they launched themselves at the adults, creating a tangle of arms and laughter and tears of joy. Later that night, with the children finally asleep, Kathleen and Caleb sat by the fire, making plans for their future. The ranch would need expansion if the cattle herd continued to grow. The house could use another room, with more children potentially on the way. The garden would have to be replanted after being trampled during the gunfight. I've been thinking, Caleb said as the fire burned low, about what you said that night. Let me be the more. And, Kathleen prompted when he fell silent, lost in thought. And I've realized something. He turned to her, his expression earnest. We're both the more that the other needed. You gave me purpose when I was just drifting. I gave you help when you were struggling. Together, we're more than either of us could be alone. Kathleen leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body next to hers. That's a good way of looking at it. I spent 5 years running from my past, he continued, his arm coming around her shoulders. Never staying anywhere, never letting myself get attached. I thought that was my punishment to always be alone. And now? His eyes, when they met hers, held a peace she'd never seen before. Now I know that redemption doesn't come from punishment. It comes from building something good out of the ashes of what was lost. Kathleen reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines etched by sun and hardship and, yes, joy. Then let's build something good, Caleb Norris. Together. 2 months later, on a bright November morning, Kathleen Cooper became Kathleen Norris in a simple ceremony at the little church in Cottonwood Creek. Thomas stood proudly beside Caleb, while Sarah scattered wildflowers she'd dried specially for the occasion. Mrs. Landry from the hotel wept openly, as did several other townspeople who'd come to respect the widow who'd faced down outlaws to protect her home. Miguel, Jim, and Ethan returned for the wedding, bringing gifts and good wishes. Even Marshal Peterson from Cedar Ridge attended, officially closing the case of Wade Holcomb, and unofficially giving his blessing to the man who had once ridden on the wrong side of the law but had found his way back to honor. That night, as Kathleen lay in her husband's arms, she thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them together: a gunshot, a dead snake, a man who stopped to help when he could have ridden on. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb murmured against her hair. "About how sometimes the things we think are ending our lives are actually beginning them. she replied. If James hadn't died, if you hadn't lost your family and gone down that dark path, if Wade Holcomb hadn't escaped prison, we might never have found each other. Caleb was silent for a moment, considering her words. I wouldn't wish my past on anyone, he said finally, but I can't regret the path that led me to you. Kathleen turned in his arms to face him, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. Remember what you said about building something good? That's what we're doing now. Every day is a new brick in the foundation. His smile in the darkness was tender. Then, we'd better make it strong. I plan on this lasting a lifetime. At least that, she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. 5 years later, the Norris Ranch had grown to be one of the most prosperous in the valley. The original homestead had expanded to include new barns, a larger house, and grazing land that stretched as far as the eye could see. Thomas, now 13, showed every sign of becoming as fine a cattleman as his stepfather. Sarah, at 11, was the darling of her school, with her mother's determination and her stepfather's quiet strength. And the twins, 3-year-old James and Catherine Norris, brought joy and chaos in equal measure as they toddled around the ranch, secure in the love of their family. On the anniversary of the day Caleb had first ridden onto her land, Kathleen found him at the spot where she'd shot the rattlesnake so long ago. He was building something a bench of polished wood, positioned to catch the sunset over the mountains. "What's this?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. Caleb straightened, pulling her into his arms with the easy affection of a man completely comfortable in his happiness. "Thought you might like somewhere to sit when you come up here to think." "How did you know I come here?" His smile was knowing. "You always did like high places, said they help you see clearer." Kathleen laughed, leaning into his embrace. "I don't need high places for that anymore. I see everything I need right here." And as they stood together, watching the sun set on another day of the life they had built, Kathleen thought about that desperate moment when she'd offered to be the more that Caleb thought his makeshift family needed. Neither of them had understood then what they truly meant to each other, how they would each become the foundation upon which the other could rebuild a life once thought lost. "I love you, Kathleen Norris," Caleb murmured against her temple. "And I love you," she replied, the words as true now as they had been the first time she'd spoken them. More than yesterday, less than tomorrow. Together, they walked back toward the house where their children waited, the path illuminated by the golden light of home.